Scene. Alex and Sarah are sitting in the school library after classes, working on a group assignment for health class. They've just learned about the basics of reproductive health, and it sparks a deep conversation about whether sex education should be mandatory in schools. Alex sighs as he closes his textbook. You know, Sarah, today's class got me thinking. Why do some people still think that sex education shouldn't be taught in schools? I mean, it's the 21st century. Don't you think it should be mandatory everywhere?
Sarah, glancing up from her notes. Yeah, absolutely. It's strange how it's still a debate in some places. Everyone goes through puberty. Everyone deals with relationships and emotions. It's just part of being human. But there are so many gaps in what people actually understand about their bodies and their health.
Alex, exactly. I feel like we learn about everything else in school, math, science, history, but something as basic and important as understanding how our own bodies work or how to handle relationships responsibly, that's treated like some kind of taboo.
Sarah, totally. And it's not just about sex itself. There are so many other things that sex ed could cover. I mean, there's consent, respecting boundaries, understanding gender identity, sexual orientation. It's all about life skills, really.
Alex nods. Right, it's more than just the birds and the bees, as people like to say. And the misinformation out there is crazy. Like, without proper education, kids just turn to the internet or their friends, and half the time, they're getting it wrong. That's dangerous.
Sarah, definitely. And the consequences can be pretty serious. Unwanted pregnancies, STDs, unhealthy relationships. It's scary to think about how much of that could be avoided with proper education.
Alex, exactly. That's why it should be mandatory. It shouldn't be up to individual schools or parents deciding whether kids get this information. Everyone should have access to it.
Sarah, yeah, and it's not like sex education encourages people to start having sex earlier. That's one of the big myths. Studies have shown that comprehensive sex ed actually helps delay sexual activity because it empowers young people to make informed decisions.
Alex smirks. Yeah, I've read about that too. The more you know, the more you can make smart choices, right?
Sarah, exactly. And not just smart choices about sex, but about relationships, boundaries, and self-respect. I feel like if we had better sex ed, a lot of the issues we see with teen relationships, like peer pressure, unhealthy dynamics, could be reduced.
Alex, leaning back in his chair, that's a good point. So what do you think should actually be included in a mandatory sex ed curriculum?
Sarah, thinking for a moment. Well, for starters, I think it should cover the basics: reproductive health, contraception, and STDs. But it needs to go beyond that. There should be a real focus on consent and communication. A lot of people don't even understand what it really means to give or get consent.
Alex, yeah, it's crazy how many people think that if someone doesn't say no, it's a yes, but consent is so much more than that.
Sarah, for sure. It's about mutual respect and understanding. And the concept of healthy relationships should be taught too. Not just romantic relationships, but friendships, family dynamics, it's all connected.
Alex, true. And what about topics like sexual orientation and gender identity? Should those be part of it?
Sarah, absolutely. People need to understand that gender and sexuality exist on a spectrum. Not everyone is the same, and that's okay. Learning about these things can create a more inclusive environment where everyone feels respected.
Alex nods. Yeah, I mean, people are starting to be more accepting, but there's still a lot of misunderstanding and even bullying around these issues. Education could change that.
Sarah, it could. And imagine how much better things would be if everyone had a safe space to ask questions and learn without feeling embarrassed or ashamed.
Alex, right. Instead of learning from random things you see online or from rumors at school.
Sarah, and another thing that doesn't get enough attention is emotional health. When we talk about sex ed, people usually think about the physical side, like contraception and preventing diseases, but the emotional side is just as important.
Alex nods. Yeah, totally. I think a lot of teenagers don't even realize how intense relationships can be emotionally. People get so focused on the physical aspects, but things like self-esteem, body image, and dealing with emotions when a relationship doesn't work out, that's huge, too.
Sarah, exactly. So many young people struggle with their self-worth, especially with the pressures of social media these days. And if sex ed included conversations about body positivity and emotional well-being, it could make a big difference.
Alex, thoughtfully, yeah, I've seen a lot of people, especially girls, getting really insecure about how they look because of stuff they see online. And guys too, with all this pressure to act or look a certain way.
Sarah, that's why I think we need to have lessons about body image and mental health. If people understood that everyone has insecurities and that it's okay to not fit into some fake perfect image, they might feel more confident.
Alex, totally. I mean, no one talks about how normal it is to feel awkward about your body, especially during puberty. And that's something sex ed could help with. Like, making people realize that everyone is going through changes and that's just part of growing up.
Sarah, yeah, and honestly, I think mental health in general should be more of a focus in schools. If sex ed covered emotional and psychological health, not just physical health, it could help people feel more comfortable talking about their feelings and reaching out when they need help.
Alex, smiling. It's funny that we don't talk more about emotions in school, considering how much they affect every aspect of life, including relationships and sex.
Sarah, exactly. Imagine if we had lessons on how to deal with breakups or how to cope with rejection in a healthy way. I feel like a lot of people would be better off if they had those tools.
Alex, yeah, instead of just pretending everything's fine or, worse, doing something unhealthy to deal with it.
Sarah, that's the thing. There's so much we could learn if schools took a more holistic approach to sex education. It's about preparing us for real-life situations, not just telling us what not to do.
Alex, right, And speaking of that, I think one of the biggest mistakes is that in some schools, they still teach abstinence-only education. Like, seriously, do they really think just telling people don't do it is going to work?
Sarah, laughing. Yeah, I don't get that at all. I mean, it's fine to promote abstinence as an option, but pretending like people aren't going to be curious or have relationships isn't realistic.
Alex, exactly. People are going to make their own choices whether schools talk about it or not. So, it makes way more sense to give them the information they need to make safe, responsible decisions.
Sarah, and that's where comprehensive sex ed comes in. If you teach students about all the options, including contraception, safer sex practices, and healthy communication, you're giving them the tools to protect themselves and their partners.
Alex, yeah, and it's not just about preventing pregnancy. Like we said earlier, STIs are a real issue, and if people don't know how to protect themselves, they're at risk.
Sarah nods. Yeah, and even if parents do try to talk about it, they might not have the right information. Plus, some parents just don't know how to approach these topics in a way that their kids will actually listen to.
Alex, leaning forward, more serious. You know what's frustrating? Though, a lot of parents don't want sex ed in schools because they think it's their job to teach their kids about this stuff. But the reality is, a lot of parents either don't have the time or they're too uncomfortable to talk about it.
Sarah, exactly. That's why schools are the perfect place to teach this stuff. It's a controlled environment, and teachers can present the facts in a way that's neutral and non-judgmental.
Alex, right, and even when parents do have these conversations, it can be awkward. Some things are just easier to talk about with a teacher or a health professional.
Sarah, that's the key. Sex ed in schools makes sure no one is left behind, regardless of their home situation. Everyone deserves access to the same knowledge, especially when it comes to something as important as health.
Alex, yeah, and everyone gets the same information. It's not like some kids learn everything while others miss out because their parents don't want to talk about it.
Sarah, thoughtfully, I'd say that schools are already responsible for teaching us how to be functioning adults. We learn how to think critically, manage finances, even how to interact socially. Why should sex education be any different? It's part of life, and learning about it doesn't mean you're promoting anything. It's about giving people facts.
Alex, so, what would you say to people who argue that schools shouldn't be responsible for teaching sex ed, that it's something that should be left to families or religious institutions?
Sarah, right. And honestly, I think the argument that schools shouldn't be involved is kind of outdated. Society has changed. We have so much more access to information now, especially through the internet, but not all of it is accurate. Schools should be a place where we can learn what's true and what's safe.
Alex, exactly. And when it comes to things like religion or personal beliefs, parents can always supplement what's taught in school at home. But that doesn't mean schools shouldn't teach the basics.
Sarah, size. Yeah, and misinformation can be so harmful. That's why I think comprehensive sex ed is so important. It's about protecting people's health and giving them the tools to make informed decisions.
Alex, for sure, it's like, if schools don't step in and teach this stuff, kids are just going to turn to Google or social media, and who knows what kind of misinformation they'll find.
Sarah, absolutely. The issues we face as teens are different from the ones we'll face as adults, so the education should reflect that. And it should start early enough that people are prepared before they're actually dealing with these things in real life.
Alex, leaning forward, exactly. And I think that's why it needs to be more than just a one-time thing. Like, we shouldn't just have one class in middle school and call it a day. Sex ed should be ongoing, something that evolves as we grow up and start dealing with different issues.
Sarah, exactly. And it shouldn't be something that's rushed or glossed over. We need time to ask questions to really understand everything.
Alex nods. Yeah, like starting in middle school, when people are just beginning to go through puberty, and then continuing through high school with more in-depth discussions about relationships, consent, and health.
Sarah, that's a great idea. And having those experts could also help make the conversation less awkward. I think a lot of the reason people don't like talking about sex ed is because it feels uncomfortable. But if it's presented in a more professional way, maybe that would change.
Alex, totally. And I think it would also help if schools brought in experts, like doctors or counselors, to talk to students. That way, we're getting information straight from professionals who deal with this stuff every day.
Sarah, that's a great idea. And having those experts could also help make the conversation less awkward. I think a lot of the reason people don't like talking about sex ed is because it feels uncomfortable. But if it's presented in a more professional way, maybe that would change.
Alex, smiling. Yeah, and maybe then people wouldn't be so weird about it. It's just information, after all.